Joining us now on Practical 365 is Travis Robinson, joining us from Quest. So one of your colleagues, Bastiaan.
Yes.
Hi, Travis. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the wonderful world of getting hands-on on projects, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do at Quest?
Yeah, I am currently the Regional Director for Platform Management in North America. So that's a fancy way of saying all the consultants that deliver our software kind of fall under my umbrella. I come from a consulting background. I've done that most of my career, 25 years. I've spent a good part of those on the road, working with customers, visiting their offices in the Midwest, the West Coast, East Coast, and internationally. So I've had, the pleasure of kind of seeing it from all perspectives now. So
how long have you been working with Quest tools over the years then for a lot of that?
Yeah, I mean, there were very few migration-based companies. There's still not a whole lot considering all the other, disciplines. So Quest was one of the tools. Even when I wasn't directly working for Quest, I was familiar with the Quest tools. Binary Tree was another one, Quadrotech, Metalogix, you name it. We're all kind of consolidated.
You did all sorts of migrations, everything, not just Active Directory. You did it all. Mail.
Mail was the big one for me. Domino, Exchange. So that was there. Profs. I mean, I go way back. Send mail, a little bit of everything. So
when you talk about traveling over the country, that might. I'm wondering whether this is similar to my experience then, where perhaps you're managing a multi-site consolidation with some Quest tools, and you've got engineers at sites and maybe 2 or 3 manufacturing plants or something like that migrating at the same time, and you're trying to avoid the chaos from occurring really, and keeping everyone happy, and walking on shop floors, office blocks, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's the name of the game as a consultant. You measure a migration by how little everyone is impacted.
Yeah.
There were times when, you had to get out and ahead of everybody and saying, this is when your unpleasant weekend is going to occur, or this is when your unpleasant night's going to occur. And it got better. The tools became more mature, technology became more mature. And, they may have to click a few buttons and they'll change the directory or the domain that's associated in their login. And that's like the extent of it. That's when you really, you've hit it out at the park and you're not impacting, because you don't want to impact the business.
So go back a few years.
Yeah, but like in that sense, would you then say, like listening to you here, when you have migrations, small ones, large ones, the secret to a successful acceptance is communication? What would you say to customers when it comes to dealing with the medium, the larger projects, and communication in that same sentence?
Well, I mean, communication is the name of the game, because, the secret of anything is setting the expectations. You want to make sure people are aware of, even if they're not going to be impacted, they should be educated and understand what's occurring and why it's going to benefit them in the long run, why the company is making that decision. I remember when I would sit down with companies, before I got anything technical, I would talk about the communications workflow. I would draw up some type of workflow on a whiteboard or something and talk about when and why you communicate these to those users. Because if you get their buy-in,
yes,
you're going to be a lot more successful. And then we would talk about identifying some key people to be early adopters. Maybe getting a first pilot group, not the pre-pilot group. Pre-pilot is usually IT. But getting some people from the admin team, because they're representing some of the CEOs and they're working and representing them. So getting their buy-in, their confidence out of the gate is very important, winning them over. I would even go and visit them during migration day to make sure they had a pleasant experience. Yeah. Because when you get some people there, cheering for you and telling you, no, it's going to be all right, I had a great experience, there are a lot more people who are going to buy into that.
Also, if you build some sort of temporary, otherwise personal relationship with those folk, then it makes things a lot easier. People, when you know somebody, when you've met somebody that you're really going to rely on to support you, perhaps things do go a bit askew further down the line. That can come in
I
very
can
handy.
tell you, when you don't do that and things go wrong, you made an enemy. And
Yeah,
I've been on
exactly,
that
yeah.
side of it as well. And I'm telling anyone listening to this podcast, know who to ingratiate yourself with. Figure out who some of these key people are, and they're not necessarily somebody you're going to see on some workflow diagram at the top of the top. You have to ask, who do I need to win over? Whose
But
buy-in do I need?
It's a valid migration planning question, because I've done this quite a lot, where you've got the VIPs and then there's that question, but the people that aren't VIPs, but
Yes.
are critical to the running of the business, the people that you will not want to. Do you have any special markers for them in terms of whether they did report to somebody in particular, or whether you need to work sensitively? Is there a group of people that you know about, and you've got a list of, especially if it's a very large international organization, that can be quite hard to sort of gather that, because it's almost like getting on the ground intel from each office as to who's the crucial person in the crucial role, who's really going to be the making or breaking of that part of the migration.
In most of my statements of work over the years, no matter who I work for, I would always say we need to identify a migration coordinator and scheduler.
Yeah.
That's one of the key roles. It's often overlooked, and that's why I would go, whether it was through a partner or direct, whoever I was working for, you need to make sure that person is identified. I, as a consultant, don't know the inner workings of your company. I need someone I can sit with in a conference room or on a bridge and say, let's plan this out. Who do we need to win over? Who do we not want to migrate early either? To make sure they're not impacted, because inevitably the project sponsor, who's usually a CIO type person, I want to be in the first round of migrations. No, you will not be in the first round of migrations. You will wait until we know this process is mature, and then we will bring you over, because we cannot impact you. So I'm working with the project coordinator constantly to make sure we have that roadmap identified and some of those key people are. And then we're also talking about how many people are we going to migrate on a given night or a given weekend, because technically we may be able to migrate everybody, but your help desk would melt down if we did that. So how many help desk calls can you take on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Because inevitably, no matter what you're migrating to, Active Directory, it's a change, and it may not even be a technical problem. It could be a feature problem or something looks different. People will call the support desk.
And this is the purpose of pilots and the ramp up of a lot of migrations as well, where you may plan for a longer migration, but have the opportunity sometimes to bring groups of people together when you learn that actually we're not getting so many support calls, or issues that occurred earlier on are resolved. Because you can have great migrations where you migrate thousands of people and get very few support calls. You can migrate 200 people and get 50 calls.
But
massive amount.
But I think here, Steve and Travis, communication is the part. So actually have preemptive milestones. Communicate 4 weeks out, communicate 3 weeks out, communicate 2 weeks out, 1 week, and then 2 or 3 days prior to this person being migrated, and having the backup plans physically potentially printed out if there are major changes, so that your support organization doesn't get impacted. Do you actually set up these kind of plans as well, Travis?
Yeah, we call it the T- schedule in the industry. So inside the dashboard, we would group users into batches. Each batch would be associated with a particular date. When you start working with the customer, you typically say, when's a good night to migrate people? Some customers prefer weekends only, some prefer weeknights, some prefer both. But regardless of when they decide to go, we know exactly what date that's going to be for a given user. So we'll have a T-28, T-21, T-14, T-7. Then we'll do a T-3. We'll do a T-1, day of, +1 after post. That's a post migration email, and and then we'll do a satisfaction survey at the end with their experience, and if they have any problems, that they call the help desk. Those type of things that should be incorporated. You might not need all those communications, but I put them out there. And what I actually do, I don't send those communications. I usually enable the communication coordinator that I talked about a few minutes ago. That's one of the things I train them on how to do, because they know their environment, they know the people, they know how to get those batches, they know who's in those batches, and I always say, hey, look, in these batches, I've created a field. You can flag this field as a VIP.
Yeah.
So we know that this person could make or break our reputation with this project. So we'll make sure we do a little bit more white glove and hand holding. Everybody's a VIP. I say that too, but this person is not only a VIP, he's a shot caller. So
would you recommend the VIP and their personal assistant be migrated at the same day, at the same night?
it depends on the technology. It depends on what you're migrating, the nature of it. Now, typically with emails, I like to have the secretary or admin assistant move over first, get familiar, get comfortable. Yes. But sometimes that forces them to be in a situation they're working out of two different email clients or email platforms, because some of the delegation and things aren't over there until they move into the new domain. So
Bastiaan, you asked the complex question. That
yeah. So it depends. It depends.
How long is a piece of string?
Well, true. Right. Because I was asking because I've had my own experiences with this where they were both migrated on the same night and things just went horribly wrong, and neither of them could work. So I was in the same kind of stressful situation where all of a sudden the team within the customer decided to migrate all VIPs and their assistants at the same time during the same night.
But if you think about it, could what they might find is that the PAs cover for other VIPs. Like
that's another thing PAs. Too. You may have more than one,
and they might also have access to and manage the direct reports of the VIPs, manage their calendars, which means that actually, you could visit them before and set them up with two mail clients, give them two machines.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. They may be working out of two, and that's a little uncomfortable for them for a while. But you asked it of them, because one thing you definitely want to do is bring over the VIP first and leave the admin there. That's a nightmare. But bring him over the same time, I would say that is more the exception than the rule. Normally, you'll bring over the administrative team first to kind of acclimate them to the new environment and have them work out of either a separate client. You don't want to wait too long, but you want to make sure they're over there and they understand how it works. They know how to do delegation. They know how to look up things, especially if they're going to a new, they're upgrading to a new client or a new workstation. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong when you bring them over, because it's just so many things, that can happen. It might not even be technical issues. They're just overwhelmed with the amount of newness that's taking place on their desk, and they get freaked out.
Folks like that have a muscle memory for a lot of the common tasks they do.
Muscle memory is the key word. Yeah,
and they can, they can see a few milliseconds difference between the things that they do, because they're used to a certain speed of doing things. And I've had Exchange upgrades where the servers are in the same location. They've basically identified, very hard to even notice, what turned out to be, of course, networking issues, because there was a difference of going from Exchange 2010, which had a very low latency, to 2016, which had a higher latency.
12 and 16, yeah.
But no, they get straight 2010, skipped like 2013 to 2016 onto that, and the issue being that there was an additional amount of network latency added on top of the new type of method of access over HTTPS. So it's about 25 milliseconds, which is not massive, but for them,
it's noticeable. Yeah.
For them, if they were arrowing up and down between messages, IT, I don't see what the problem is. I arrow, it moves. They were used to bam, 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 going around. So I ended up driving up on a Sunday night to the customer, spending time there Monday, Tuesday, just looking at Outlook logs to try and find whether it was something.
Yeah, and it could be client based. It's just a client, and how it dealt with.
It was the network.
Over HTTP, all those different protocols that changed between different Outlook clients, and the security, encapsulation on top of those messages.
All that had changed.
All those are a factor. Why? So you want to try to introduce the least amount of change as possible. I'm the same way. You give me a new version of Windows, I'm useless for a few weeks because I'm used to going certain places. I want to search for things a certain way. Things are, in a certain place. It's just human nature. Imagine being on a client for 15 years, like a Lotus Notes client, and all of a sudden someone puts you
Yeah.
on Outlook and everything's different and you're freaking out. So those are the types of things you really, really have to talk about. The technical piece of it, to some degree, is not as difficult as it's like we always used to say. It's easy to move mail. It's hard to move people.
Yeah.
That was our saying. It's easy to migrate, Active Directory, but it's hard to migrate people. People get set in their ways, and that's why it's so important to get the project off to a success early. Because when you have a few bad migration experiences, now you're on calls with the CIO and the project sponsor, and they don't want to have to be on a call every other day, making sure things are going well before the next migration. But they've staked their reputation on the line, bringing me in. I represent my company, so they want to make sure that nothing goes awry because their reputation is at risk too. So you want it to be successful at all levels for everybody.
The problem with mail migrations is often you can go to a site, migration's happened, it's been successful. A successful migration, they don't really notice anything different from their side. The client might have even been upgraded and looked roughly the same.
Sure.
So you've only got really failure as an option. It's people are either going to walk into work, sit down at their desks, or work, turn them on at home, and then say, right, yeah, no, they said there was a migration. I can't see anything different. Did they do it? And that's a success. Whereas a lot of projects where there is a lot of change, then you've got a big chance to say, well, we are doing these things, but look at the benefits that are in it for you. For example, moving from a file service to OneDrive means that documents take a little bit longer to open, but you no longer have 100 versions of them and you can co-author and all these sort of things. But email, if it doesn't work anymore or it's slower, then that you're only going to lose. You've not really got an upside to this unless you're introducing new functionality. But let's face it, on most migrations, people have had mobile email, all that sort of stuff, for going on for nearly 20 years.
Well, that's where setting the right expectations really comes in handy too in the communication process, because most users can handle just about anything if you prepare them for it, and you make sure they understand why.
Yeah.
But if they're expecting something and it doesn't work that way, and you didn't explain to them or set their expectations, that's when people get really annoyed and upset, and it's hard for them, because you say, hey, look, when you initially open your Outlook client, you got to pull down, all that mail locally. OST files gotta replicate down. You may have some latency, and if you do 10,000 people in one day pulling that down to their local workstations, it's going to be a lot slower. Now you're not going to do 10,000, but you get the idea. Setting those expectations is very, very important. And let's let them know this is just an initial thing. Once it builds up, it's only going to be the incremental mail that comes in when you open up your workstation. So those are the types of things you've got to make sure you're communicating across the board to the customer, and they can deal with that. But if you're not, they think something's wrong. They're going to call the help desk. You're going to get help desk spikes, and then you're going to be in a conference call explaining things. And why are people calling the help desk? Well, we didn't communicate this to them. So you want to put that all out there. Like I said, it's hard moving people. It's easy moving mail, or it's easy moving Active Directory. You've got to make sure you set the right expectation. I think that's what makes the difference between a really, really well thought out migration plan and one that, maybe in retrospect, that was a lot rougher than it could have been. And, there you are.
There's a fine line though, isn't there? Because a very, very long migration that's needlessly long can possibly inconvenience a lot of people for a long period of time, especially where it's cross tenant and stuff like that, where there's limited comms between a set of people in the business. But a fast one, again, problems as well, because you're not giving enough time to allocate enough resource to support people. And I suppose that's the magic of understanding how long a migration is going to take.
And that's something every customer has to balance. Some customers are very, very conservative and want little disruption as possible. Hey, can I do 30 a night for the next 5 years? Well, if you did that, you'll be doing a new migration to a new technology.
By the time you finish,
a year and a half into it, by the finish, you won't even be using that. But they want, they don't want to get yelled at, but you also have to balance, hey, do you want to pay us for 3 years when we could do it in a year? Sticking around and doing this. If you have an unlimited budget, great. I'd love to have guys, engaged and billable for 3 years. But when I show you how much that's going to cost you, because there's a certain fixed price associated with any migration, but then the variable cost of having someone do a migration that is 1,000. Well, there's not much more time it takes to do 1,000 than it takes to do 100. It's just more of the same. I have to prep it. I have to set it up. I have to make sure the numbers match on both sides. I have to make sure I do these things. I send these emails out, let everybody know. It doesn't take me that much more to do 1,000 than it would do 100. There's a fixed cost associated with that, but the variable cost is very minor. So you might as well move a little faster if you can.
I'm going to see if you can guess the industry, and anyone that works in the industry isn't going to be offended by this. But I've had that same conversation with customers where it could and probably should go faster than they wanted, because it was, as you said, actually, possibly a number of years, far slower than the migration should take, and there was a compromise, I guess, on both sides, because I had the same conversation where I'm saying, as much as I want folks billable in the team, I also run the risk that if we put somebody on this for 2 years, they're going to get bored and leave, because it's that few mailboxes a night. There's not going to be those issues. You are going to want to go faster once you start off. And they were adamant. They said, our users, primarily use email. That's what they live on. The user experience with email is absolutely key. Can you guess what industry that was? They still have fax machines. Sorry?
Oh, you said they still have fax machines. So it was the
Travel?
public sector? Was it government? State and local government?
Legal.
Oh, legal. Yeah, legal.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about that leading up to this.
Yes. I was giving you an easy reading.
They probably had some fax system intertwined with their email system that why is that not working anymore?
I think on that particular project, they had a team of people that dealt with faxes. When they first told me, this was like 2017, I'm like, that sounds like Back to the Future Part 2. What the really? Yes, like literally, massive part of how they were working. But email being, the thing, lots and lots of filers rather than pilers, very intricate use of email, very massive use of enterprise Vault as well. But the key thing for them was the user experience, because people, they're either doing what they do or they're using email as the key communication tool between their clients and other organizations. So any disruption.
Definitely the legal industry. I mean, if you've ever seen a courtroom or been, seen a clerk, they still have file cabinets full of stuff. And some of the bigger projects were taking all that stuff in files and putting it into a digital format. That took years. Some people still are kind of in that mode. So they're very resistant to change because it's legal. There's so many. There's so many things that govern that. How long do you keep something? When you archive it, do you rehydrate it before you migrate it? I mean, there's just a million things, in that particular industry. That's why it makes it so complex and so hard to work with certain industries.
It's a bit like professional services as well. But law firms often are evolving into professional services firms, obviously, aren't they? But professional services firms like IT consulting and others, there's also not a massive motivation to change when the change through automation, stuff like that, reduces billable hours rather than, it doesn't give you the opportunity to bill more. Because if you've got, for example, your consultants who, I'll give you an example. You've got a consultant, they're supposed to be on site for 2 weeks doing something and they do it in a day, that they probably haven't done the customer service, hence the extreme example. But also, that's also a problem because the customers can say, well, I'm not paying for 2 weeks, they've been here a day. And the same in it, it's true across all sorts of professional services as well.
I think it's a fine line, though, because if you want to upgrade and stay current in so much that it helps you make money, become efficient, and you're able to compete. When you become so entrenched in old technology that you can no longer take advantage of technical gains because you're on a bad on an old platform that doesn't support those things, then you get yourself in trouble. So
Yeah.
I would, if I had a company, I would probably be I wouldn't be an early adopter of anything, because you're going to be basically a guinea pig for, whoever's selling you that particular solution. Maybe somewhere in the middle to late I think is one but if you're
Yeah.
so far away now, there are the customers that you actually have to watch out for, because if a customer's been that resistant to change and you're coming in, they're one of the last people on Lotus Notes, or one of the last people on an
Yeah.
ERP system, or the last
Ooh.
person on a version of Active Directory, that is going to probably be a very, very difficult migration, because they didn't really, upgrade when they were supposed to, and to make the migration easier. You're
Yep.
going from this version to a new version. You might actually have to upgrade them several times in between just to make the upgrade possible, because
Yeah.
you can't upgrade from this version to that version. There's too much that's going to be lost. The schema system, there's a different, type of schema in the background. It's just not going to work. So you're asking, you really have to have a mature scoping process. You definitely don't want to do that as a fixed fee project. You want to do that as a time and material project, in case so you can say, look, we didn't know. Now when we start digging, we're seeing all these issues. Every time we dig a little bit further, there's another issue. You have to be able to say, look, we need to add more hours, but you have to be very careful. If I'm an old environment and you're willing to do a fixed fee migration for me, I'm thinking I got them. I win, because
Yep.
any problem involved, it's based on milestones, not hours. And you're going to be stuck holding the bill, and chances are you're going to spend a lot more time doing that work than you anticipated.
So you've basically been saying that communication is key. Industries can affect the complexity and the length of how projects get set up, and especially how our listeners can protect themselves setting up these projects as times and material rather than fixed cost. What other major challenges do you stumble across over and over again with, where you would recommend a certain approach? Are there 2 or 3 things where you'd say, these are the things I continuously see? It should be obvious, but it just gets forgotten, or due to industry or situation, all of a sudden we stumble and we come across it. What can you provide the listeners for advice here?
Well, going back to something we talked about earlier, I usually would give my customers full menu. I would say, listen, if you want to migrate over a 2-year period, it doesn't make sense for me to be here for 2 years. I'll be more than happy to do it, but I'm going to enable you and your team to do it. How about that? I set everything up. I validate it through several pilots. Maybe I even take on the first 2 or 3 velocity migrations, but you got another 70 of those waiting for you. Do you want me to just enable you? I'll give you a run book. I will walk you through. I'll be like your personal trainer for a few of these. You can look over my shoulder, then I'll look over your shoulder. And then you're going to have probably the 80-20 rule. I always talk about that. You're going to know 80% of the things you need to know in that training period. The other 20% could happen, but might not happen. So there's no point in me telling you that until you've run across it. So that's worked well in the past. And a lot of customers did that, and they would call in the help desk. You had a support desk, and they would say, hey, this particular person was there was a problem with that account. We give them some advice, send them to a knowledge article, and they'd fix it. So that was something a lot of customers do. Or you hand it off to another partner that maybe specializes in that, and maybe there's a little cheaper price point. You're not charging them $400 an hour. Maybe that partner's going to charge them $150 an hour, and they do it. Or you have an offshore team you developed, and you have a lower price point with a team in India or Pakistan or something like that. So I would try to give the customers, always give them a choice. I would never box them into a hole. And more time than not, if I explained it correctly and made sure they understand, they would make the right decision for their business. Sometimes it would be like, no, I don't want to prep migrations all day and then have to kick them off after work and then watch them through the night and then deal with problems when people come the next day. I'm going to burn up my team. There's no way that I'm going to do it. Okay, well, we got a partner in India who will take care of that. They've done these type of migrations before. They have a proven track record, and they're only $20 an hour. I need 5 of those guys. I can budget for that. I can't budget for this. Or maybe we keep you on. You work 10 hours a week, making sure you keep things on track, help us with some big problems, and work it like that. So that's type of things I've always tried to give our customers. That's why I think it's so important. You got to be flexible nowadays. Some customers will only do fixed fee projects because the way they budget and their accounting departments work, they don't want some open-ended project that's going to, milk them dry. And then some customers, they're fine with the time and material project as long as, and they'll fight you tooth and nail if you want to charge them for more hours because, hey, we thought you get it done, in the hours you said, and I can respect that too. Like I said, you have to be able to give them a hybrid of both. Maybe we do the initial time and material, and we do the end of the migration, rinse and repeat as a fixed fee project, and we'll bring on an offshore team to help do that because it's really just they're working their day. It's really your night, and we do that. But
there's a few approaches there, like a fixed price for the plan, and then requote a fixed price for the rest of it. But do you remember when Fast Track came out from Microsoft?
Yeah.
And
big part of that.
Part of that was a bit of a worry for many partners. Certainly, one thing you mentioned was having blocks of time that you can use. So customers who wanted fixed price, but then they've got Fast Track, where in some respects, Microsoft have offered to do things where the thing that they're saying they're going to do is give them a link to the document on how. But then the other part of that was they won't communicate with users, but they used to have a migration velocity team. They turn the wheel on the migration for the customer. So they do the migrations overnight and let them fail or not fail. Managed migration to the most limited extent, I suppose. But the benefit of that certainly was that if you were going for that 10 hours a week or something like that, where you're keeping there for similar reasons to Microsoft to keep the momentum after the consultant leaves or after everything's set up, then you can spend a couple of days solving the biggest problems and then spread that out over the project. Because one thing you can probably be sure of is the hardest problem is going to be at the beginning, and then things will get easier for the customer once they've got over some of the big humps, but they're going to need you at some point. And also you want to check in with them. You want to make sure that things are going okay and be proactive.
Yeah, no, that's the key. I was a big part of the Fast Track when Microsoft initially kind of came up with the concept. I think their goal was it started with the mail. They wanted to get everybody off of Lotus Notes, off of G Suite, anything they could get you, some of the old Novell products. There was still some of that out. So they would, GroupWise, they would sponsor migrations for corporations, and they had partners. Some they would do themselves. They had a team. Fast Track team in Seattle, but most of the heavy lifting was done in India, in Hyderabad mostly, and Bangalore a little bit.
Romania as well for Europe. It was a very good operation when it was all like that.
They had there were some things too because certain industries in certain countries had that GDRP, and they want to make sure there's people in their physical region that's touching their information.
Personal
so they had
like
Germany's a big one, stuff like that. So they had some satellite offices, but most of the work was done out of India.
I mean, people give them a bad rap, but when it came to some of the big corporate enterprise customers who were multinationals, who were dealing with UK, Australia, US, three-letter agencies, and so on, a fast track migration was more than possible because they could get the right people into the right place. But always, my opinion was, at least because I worked at a partner, was they work better when actually, you've got the partner putting their experience into getting everything set up, doing all the planning, and then you still need a migration coordinator who doesn't actually need to do the technical part of it, right?
Yeah. I mean, they did a really good job of modeling that because they were sponsoring the migrations if you qualified. So I've got 50,000 seats. I might stick around with Lotus a few more years if you don't pay for it for me. And then they would contract a company like Quest or Binary Tree, or there were just a bunch of them out there to perform the migration. And they want to get over as fast as they can. And it made sense because they want to get those licensing, whether it was they were on a E3 or E5, or now they want to push even higher licenses with more bundles. They saw the long picture. They saw the opportunity to, get those customers, billing them monthly for those licenses. So they got them over there. And the other thing too, another reason why I encourage companies to get over to the other side as quickly as possible, whether it's an Active Directory or a mail migration, is you don't want to live in coexistence. You don't want to live in two separate systems. You want to get all your people. These systems are designed to work better when they are all in the same environment. When you've got to cross environments, bad things can happen. You're crossing. There's gateways. There's ports that have to be open. There's latency. There's just a bunch of things. There's interoperability between the two systems that may come into play. So one of the ways I got customers over the hump a little faster, I would always encourage them. Do you want to live in two different systems? The faster you get those over, it's going to help your help desk, and it's going to help your workers as well. So get
And not just
everybody over
that,
as
the,
quickly
the
as you can.
cost of maintaining two systems over time, patching
Licensing
it.
for two
Oh
systems is
my
another
goodness.
factor. All those
Yeah.
things. Exactly. So I would encourage them. So that was another reason to push them over. But ultimately, it came down to how much change can they take on a given night, and how much can their help desk absorb. And then we would offer them options to go to some third-party help desk companies where you just put an option on your phone, you press 7, and it would wire you into a separate help desk system that you outsource for the time that the migration took place. So I work with companies like Coca-Cola for that, JP Morgan, big firms. They were like, no, we need to move aggressively, and our help desk cannot absorb it. We're going to outsource this to one of the help desk outsourcing firms that you guys work with. But getting back to what you said about certain industries and certain areas, there are certain industries that are just different. I mean, obviously, some of the government type of industries, because you couldn't put them in the same cloud if it's a defense contractor or certain. You have to be. There's another level of security you're going to need, and then there's, like you said, there's some with global organizations. There are certain countries where you have to have people working with that data in that country,
Yeah.
and you have to sign off that you're going to do those types of things.
That does mean that I think there's always going to be challenges that customers have got where they've got people that might move jobs between regions, but some of those kind of organizations have challenges like that. They might have competitors in the same industry that don't have the same challenge, where it might be that the administrators of the systems cannot possibly be a foreign national for the people in that country. So they need tenants in that country as well as government clouds as well, that all need to be able to interoperate and work together. Or tenant needs to be based in a particular region because of it's such a minefield. And you see those organizations, they're not always the ones that you think. It can be part of the manufacturing supply chain, because the electronics store up the road from someone in the middle of England might also be selling
or
components
defense
that are used in
contractor.
spaceships.
You get a Boeing, a
Yeah, yeah.
Raytheon, someone like that. They have to have their tenant in
Well, they're
certain
the
places.
obvious ones, right? But there are electronics companies all over the place that you wouldn't expect, and then global and such. But they're part of that supply chain, obviously. So they, once you realise it, it's pretty obvious to why they've got that division, why that's in the GovCloud. But it makes those projects interesting from a consultant's point of view. But it means that the customer really needs to skill up on not only the migration tooling, but the directory synchronization tooling that's in some cases, like the Quest tooling, going to be overlaid for a very long time to keep the environment ready to move people around. And also syncing things. Microsoft have obviously made some strides in those areas, but those kind of customers are often looking very much at the long term. And with those gov clouds and so on, they're looking to overcome barriers that Microsoft might have.
Yeah, and I always say the key for me is, like there's always a three-legged stool. It's obviously the technology. I mean, there are differences in tools. Some companies have better tools than other companies, and then there's the methodologies. Some companies have better processes. How do you approach a migration? Your communication process. How what's the order of things? All those things are refined by having done it thousands and thousands of times and improved upon. So you cannot underscore that at all. And then finally, it's the talent, the people. Do they have the best people? Is this what this person does? You specialize in these types of migrations. How many have you done? Who have you done them for? Are they big? Are they small? And what industries have you done those things? You want all those things. That's the three big things. You want to make sure there's a good tool set. You want to make sure you've got talented people who've done it before. So, that pilot's been in the air, thousands of times. That's going to make you feel better. Seen a little bit of everything. So, you don't want some newbie or somebody
Yeah.
who's a part-time pilot, when the stakes are that high. And then obviously it's the methodology, setting up people for success and the things you need, and then the fourth, you could say the right client. Not everybody's a good client. There's bad clients out there. Let's be honest. you know,
No, Travis,
you
there
know,
are no bad clients.
and early on, you're like, oh man, this is going to be a tough one.
People know that they work for a difficult organisation. Sometimes, I've worked with a customer and they've warned you about the company they work for.
Exactly, the client. Yeah, go to Glassdoor, check them out.
No, not even that. People are great to work with, but often then in the project, they know that they know that once this kicks off, the whole team's going to have a lot of pressure on them, and they're going to have to shovel things your way, and that's what you're there for. And it's always good to be told that up front, but you're always expecting, aren't you? Because people get stressed. People are people. The most important thing, apart from obviously technical skills and planning skills and all the other things, you've got to have their back as a partner or as a company, because I don't mind if somebody at the customer, their boss, shouts at me. If they're shouting at the customer contacts I'm working with, their job might be errors, but they can shout at me as much as they want, especially if it's not my fault. Go for it. I'll get on with my life after that. I don't
know how many
being
times I've called someone up and say, hey, did you ever work with such and such company? I said, yeah, they yell and they're very defensive. They said, yeah, that's just part of their culture. That they're like that with everybody. I'm like, that would have been nice to them, though, because I would have maybe asked not to be on that project. You know what I mean? Because sometimes companies do treat vendors, or consultants a certain way, and it's important to know, hey, if so-and-so ever worked,
Stockholm syndrome, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And often the person that your customer contact, you'll get on with, so you're part of the I'm not going to carry on with this analogy. It's not helpful, but you're part of the crew. You've got their back, because that's what they're getting on a daily basis, right? And that's where you build the trust off, because they need someone to have their back when they're working at a place like that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I've had customers that decided on a Thursday night I wasn't going home because something didn't get done out of my control, and they just called my boss and say, we need Travis over the weekend to be around here to help fix this. And they said, hey, well, he was there all week. Well, we couldn't get anything done because we had a big network problem and nothing to do with Travis, but I've got a deadline. And I'm thinking to myself, well, do I want to stay? Am I going to quit my job, or am I going to stick around this weekend and do things like that? Because that's a lot to ask from someone.
I would say,
being a guy that I am, I stuck around, but I've had plenty of projects where, those things. So you just have to be prepared for those types of things and stuff like that. And it happens in migrations from time to time.
And it can happen. So I think this is where you're hitting the nail on the head. It can happen sometimes, and it all depends on the relationship. If you can ask someone to stay over the weekend, and it's the tone in which you do it. But it cannot be a regular occurrence where every weekend something happens and you insist your consultants that they have to stay over the weekend.
It theoretically shouldn't. It's not just about a relationship, though. It is about power. Some customers, let's face it, have got more. If it's like some of the names you mentioned, have more weight than others.
True.
In terms of that's the nature of it. If you want to work for a big tough company to work for that treats people that way and says you've got to work all weekend as well, it's nicer to work for a company that doesn't need to do that. And actually, it's the relationship where, like, one of my customers, a financial services customer, I mentioned them earlier, I was more than happy to drive up on a Sunday, not because they were under the cosh, but because I liked them.
Yeah. Oh, that's the relationship.
That's a big part of it. That makes the project much more satisfying when you actually like the people. And then when you don't like the people, it's not satisfying.
I usually like the people, to be fair.
Yeah, I would say 99%, but there were some customers who just they couldn't get out of their own way.
They make great anecdotes. They make great anecdotes.
Well, yeah, I mean, they couldn't get out of their own way.
There's a story out of it.
Contractors you've employed that have had to be kicked off site on the first day. I had one, and you reminded me of coexistence for a notes migration. I'm in front of the customer, and they were asking about encryption, and the guy said, "Oh, it doesn't need to be encrypted over the internet. It's just ones and zeros."
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, but he was so confident. And
Well,
I
that's
tried-
part of it
and I
too.
was
You know,
like,
they should
and
say
it
the
was-
definition of a consultant is one page ahead of the customer and the owner's manual. You know what I mean? And you've got it. Once you lose your confidence and the customer doesn't believe in you anymore, that's another. I've been on projects like that too early on in things, and where I lost the customer's confidence. So
it's
those
difficult to
you know,
regain.
Yeah.
it's very difficult to regain. Yeah. It's very difficult. So you never want to lose their confidence. That's something if you can avoid that, you want to make sure you put people, but it's the responsibility as someone who puts people in projects. It's my responsibility to set up my guys for success.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to take a new I've been hired, and the first day they've sent me to a customer and didn't even train me on the technology, and I've delivered. But that's no way to live.
No.
You know, I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing, and they're going, hey, you'll figure it out. No. I don't do that to my guys.
But that happens. I swear to God, a Microsoft dedicated consultant. I don't know if he was I think he was a contractor, to be fair, that they'd employed, and he was then going to be dedicated to the customer on site. And he knew that I was MVP. In fact, I think we interviewed him a few months back, and he turned up at our offices dressed in a t-shirt for the interview.
No.
So I was surprised to
Makes
see
a statement.
Yeah. So I don't know how long he lasted. Let's assume he did.
Yeah, you better be real good if you're showing up in that outfit. You better be real good. You can't dress like that and suck.
And he said, I've never done anything with Intune before. They want me to implement it. So this is a guy that's working for Microsoft as a dedicated engineer. And no disrespect to Microsoft. Obviously, it's a contract to the customer. I suspect was really pushy. We need someone on Monday or something like that. Yeah. So no blame, but he wasn't even a page ahead. Because enterprise customers, often they spent 2 years learning this stuff, so they figured this out very, very quickly because they were book ahead.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, but like I said, you know, in today's, it's different today. Like I said, when I would put someone on a project, I would say, hey, look, I'm not going to, your first project, you're not going to be in some shoulder surfing where the customer's controlling the keyboard and you're telling them what to do, and there's 10 people listening in the room, because that's a recipe for disaster. I wouldn't put a first-time consultant in a situation like that. I'd put a more senior consultant in a situation like that. Now, if you have the right to log in and VPN from home, and you have all the access you need, and you need to call in someone more senior and share your screen and get them over those speed bumps, that's the kind of project you want initially out of the box. Something small, maybe 40 or 80 hours, you know, and you want it to be the right situation where they're going to give you VPN access, and we're not going to throw you to the wolves, because when you're shoulder surfing, you got to know your stuff cold because there's people watching. You're on a bridge, and you know you need to really be confident.
Ideally, one where a customer gives you a laptop, so you've got your work laptop to search for the answer while you're
exactly. Listen, thank God for three screen. Let's put it that way.
But those are the most difficult ones where
I like the customers that will send me a laptop to work off of, cancel the project, and I'd keep the laptop. It's like, ready? Do you want this back? Do you want this?
That's never happened to me. I'm the
That's
one that's had to drive with all the other laptops back to the customer to hand them over. But there's some fun stories. But the one thing that this strikes me that I wasn't expecting, that actually, you know, you might run the teams, but you're actually a very experienced consultant, where you've hit the nail on the head. You know, the toughest kind of jobs that are out there, and the things, you know, what not to do if you're getting your team straight on into their first projects. You know what? I think a lot of folks managing practices and stuff like that, employed people, those are the big mistakes that they make. You know, throwing people in at the deep end and seeing if they sink or swim. That's not setting someone up for success, is it? That's not that's how to make people quit in the first week
or burn out over time if you continuously do that.
You know,
no way to live. That's happened to me in my career plenty of times. You know, and it's you know, it was a very, very nervous week. You know, because you're like, I don't really, you know, I still think I have them, but I'm a few questions away from them completely losing confidence in me. But you know, turned it around, it worked out. But yeah, I wouldn't want any consultant to go through that. So, set your guys up for success, and they'll stick around and be happy.
I think on that note, it'd be a good time to wrap it up. So thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was massively enjoyable.
It was.
This was entertaining. I loved it. Yeah, you
yes.
talk about some of those old war stories.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Only thing we didn't have, we're not sitting at the bar with beer or something.
That's a shame.
We're doing it virtually.
So yeah, if we meet it, that's the first thing we'll probably have to do: war stories and a pint or whatever. And I think it'd be interesting to have you or perhaps you and some of the team on to talk about some of those war stories, because I think you learn. The part of the war stories is you learn from each other, isn't it? You learn. You learn from other people's mistakes.
I learned more from my mistakes than I ever did my successes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's projects that at least once a week, I'm still, when you're sitting down in your easy chair, there's nothing on your mind. You go back to that project. Back in your mind, you're like,
I tell you what, that'd be a good thing for one of the techs. We could do a Vox Pop thing, go around and say, what's your worst war story that you can tell in 10 seconds or something like that? Because we've all got some of those, and we can blur out the faces and change the voices if people need it as well.
We used to always say there's only two kind of migration events at Quest. There's your standard migration event, and then there's your resume updating event. And I always tell customers, if you want to migrate everybody this weekend, then you need to update your resume on Monday, because that's not a good idea. That's a resume updating event. I'm telling you that right now.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, to be one of these Power Platform people who make it happen, everyone cheers.
Yeah, right.
I'm only kidding. Nothing against Power Platform apps making their no-code, low-code apps and everybody cheering. Thank you so much again. Yes, and
it was a pleasure. Anytime. I'm happy to have been a part of this. So thanks for inviting me, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again real soon.
Like that very much, Travis.
Anyway, that's going to be that.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Take it easy.